And here we go!
Viewer discretion is advised.
If Jerry Reinsdorf looks like an accountant, that's because he is. He used to work for the IRS, but then made his fortune in real estate. He bought the White Sox in 1981 and the Bulls in 1984 for only $16 million. Reinsdorf is known for being incredibly cheap and generally anti-player and anti-players union. A lot of Chicago fans blame him for the breakup of the 90s Bulls. The Bulls. Okay, you get a pass for the 6 championships in 8 years. However, MJ's gambling suspension easily cost you 2 championships. You've been lackluster since the domination years, but luckily you've been smart enough not to hire MJ or Phil Jackson as your GM, but either one of them would have run Jimmy Butler out of town just the same. And of course, you gave us Derrick Rose, the NBA's version of Windows 98. Isn't he on the Cavs and isn't he hurt again already?
Dear Chicago Bulls fans, can you still hear me? I know it's really faint. It's like I am almost gone completely. I might never come back and see you again. Signed, the championships of the past.
What happens when the party is over and your dynasty is done? You cart out old furniture on the court named Charles Oakley, Greg Anthony, Brad Miller, and Marcus Fizer so you can get blown out like red curry through your digestive system. Those 4 starters combined for 18 points total. At halftime, they were fed scones and had their adult diapers changed. Monumental bust Joe Smith led all scorers with 17 points. Actually, one of the funniest mascots in the NBA, Benny is known for making the staff at the United Center clean up his mess. According to his Wikipedia page, he is now just as popular as Michael Jordan. Yes, can't wait for those Air Bennies to come out this summer. I'll admit it, he's funny. The stadium with the largest listed seating capacity, the United Center, served as the last venue for the Ringling Brothers Circus. Fitting for how the team has been run since the late 90s. Speaking of the 90s, the only players who had their numbers retired from those teams are Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, omitting such greats from the rafters as Judd Bushler, Bill Wennington, and Joe Klein. There has never been any evidence to confirm the theory that MJ was suspended 2 years for gambling, but the Bulls did do something that was underhanded. Turned a blind eye to all of his gambling in order to keep winning. Jordan once owed $110K to a cocaine dealer. He was seen in Atlantic City before a playoff game. Though not illegal, the Bulls certainly did nothing about his airness and his vices. Garpax was the greatest tragedy to hit Chicago since the fire. Gar is out finally, which means they're free to hire an equally incompetent replacement. Since his airness left, the Bulls have been a mismanaged festival of forgotten glory and sadness. D-Rose gave you hope that was quickly shattered. Now Butlerless, you dwell in the cellar like a diseased sewer rat, having missed the playoffs 4 years in a row. Oh, and guess what? Michael Jordan was subject to load management.
And finally, Benny the Bull, Chicago. Pretty much everything you could want in a mascot. He talks shit, he looks really cool, and he gets the crowd fired up with ease. Rating 10 out of 10. Chicago Bulls, Michael Jordan. He just narrowly beat out former teammate Scottie Pippen for the honor. Jordan already gets enough praise and worship from all his minions who pretend he's a demigod, so I won't go too overboard with praise. But yes, Jordan was really fucking good. He was so far above anybody else he played against in his prime, and he has the hardware to back it up. 6 rings, 6 finals MVPs, 5 MVPs, 10 scoring titles, the highest points per game in both regular and playoff history. The only way to really discredit him is to point out how his finals competition were a bunch of plumbers and community college students compared to some other all-time greats. But even so, it's hard to argue against Jordan being the best basketball player of all time. Such a class act. Chicago Bulls, Jay Williams. The Bulls drafted Williams 2nd overall in 2002 following his outstanding career at Duke. He was supposed to be the point guard of the future, leading the quote-unquote baby Bulls to success in the post-Jordan era. Unfortunately, it was not to be. Williams only played 1 year with the Bulls, an up-and-down rookie season, season that wasn't horrible, but not anything to write home about either. That off-season, he was in a motorcycle crash that gave him career-ending injuries and also violated the terms of his contract. Just an unfortunate scene all around. Thankfully, he survived and went on to have a successful career at ESPN. Chicago Bulls. Bulls fans know better than anybody how badly the team has been run over the last couple decades, so I won't go that route. Instead, let me go after what they hold dearly, which is the 90s. MJ's competition, especially in the finals, was complete dog shit compared to LeBron's. Yes, it was. Don't you talk back to me. MJ was lucky his peak years coincided with all the great teams that owned his ass in the 80s getting old. If MJ had to face the KD Warriors in the finals, he would have retired mid-series. Derrick Rose didn't deserve his MVP, and he also admitted he didn't know what consent was while on trial for sexual assault. So humble.
In 1998, the Bulls did it again. Michael Jordan's team accomplished something legendary when they won 3 straight championships from 1991 to 1993. Then Jordan retired, unretired, and incredibly led the Bulls to another 3-year streak of glory. 72 wins and a finals victory over the Sonics in 1996, then 2 more rings from back-to-back defeats of the mighty Utah Jazz, punctuated by MJ's iconic series-winning shot. Just like the first three-peat, Jordan had an ideal squad around him in the late 90s. He still had his second superstar, the do-everything, stop-everyone, eternally underappreciated small forward Scottie Pippen. And he still had Phil Jackson, the coach who became an icon himself by speaking in riddles, orchestrating egos, and administering the triangle offense designed by his mentor and assistant Tex Winter. But so many of these role players were new for the second go-round. Ron Harper, the perfect, tall, defensive point guard to complement Jordan in the triangle. Dennis Rodman, moody, eccentric, and brilliant at protecting the basket, the pest haunting every opposing big man. Tony Kukoc, the former EuroLeague superstar who found new life as a fearsome tertiary gunner on his first NBA team. Luke Longley, the diligent, reliable center from Australia. And Steve Kerr, one of the most automatic shooters ever. And you can thank Jerry Krause for that supporting cast. It took dogged scouting and clever moves by the Chicago GM to reconstruct a 3-peat capable supporting cast for Bulls owner Jerry Reinsdorf. But while this Bulls team was a masterpiece, it was volatile beyond belief. And within days of achieving ultimate glory, the Bulls would begin to explode. Like, really a lot. The Bulls won championship number 6 on June 14, 1998. About a week later, the first domino fell. That one was only a matter of time. Phil Jackson and Jerry Krause were not on good terms. They were on the kind of terms where Krause invited every Bulls assistant to his stepdaughter's wedding and invited Iowa State head coach Tim Floyd, but didn't invite Phil. They were on the kind of terms that led to Krause vowing that Phil's 1-year extension with the Bulls in 1997 would be his last season in Chicago, even if they went undefeated. And if you didn't believe rumors of a rift, then you had to believe it when Phil himself did a running diary for ESPN magazine, in the middle of the playoffs no less, and said, for instance, that he didn't buy Krause a Christmas gift because he couldn't bring himself to give his boss something of value. No? Still not doing it for you? How about, quote, "It's not a secret that I will be gone from the Bulls at the end of the playoffs," end quote. You didn't have to read tea leaves when Phil was stuffing them down your throat. Phil Jackson's a different kind of dude. So Phil resigned, and as soon as he made it official, Bulls fans turned back to some things they'd heard from and about Michael Jordan. Jordan had told the media he wouldn't play for any coach but Jackson. And MJ had no connection to the Bulls' planned replacement, that notable wedding guest, Tim Floyd. Jordan had told the fans, in his own ESPN magazine feature, that he didn't want to start a war with Krause, but that the Bulls hadn't shown him loyalty and he thought Phil should be the GM. And this preseason quote from Krause had pissed Jordan off, though Krause insisted for the rest of his life that he was misquoted on that one. Either way, as soon as Phil bailed, everyone readied for the other shoe to drop. But the '98 NBA lockout forced them to wait. And wait, and then boom. Days before the work stoppage was resolved, Jordan announced his retirement. And with Jordan gone, a whole lot of shoes began to drop. On January 21st, the Bulls ditched Rodman in a flurry of cuts. He'd been a distraction throughout the championship run and had recently been threatening to retire, which he didn't. The same day, Chicago sent Kerr to the San Antonio Spurs in a sign-and-trade. Pippen, meanwhile, had been part of trade rumors and trade demands for years. As recently as November of '97, that is, between championships 5 and 6, Pippen again told reporters he wanted to be traded and that he wouldn't play for the Bulls again. Obviously, he did keep playing for the Bulls, played hurt even, and got another ring out of it. But the day after Kerr got dealt, now just over a week out from Jordan's retirement, the Bulls finally did the deed, signing and trading Pippen to the Rockets for Roy Rogers. The day after that, out went Longley. So in a matter of days after MJ retired, the Bulls lost another 4 key members of a champion squad. They were mostly older dudes on expiring contracts, yes, but it's not like they were totally valueless. Pippen stayed productive for a few more years, Kerr helped the Spurs win a title, and Longley remained a starting caliber center. Now look at what the Bulls got back. Only one of these draft picks would amount to something for Chicago. Only one of these people would actually play games for the Bulls, and they weren't good ones. NBA teams played just 50 games in the post-lockout season, and thank God for that, because 82 games of this roster might have given Chicagoans some sort of radiation poisoning. The few incumbents on Floyd's Bulls all shifted up in the rotation. Role players like Kukoc and Harper became the stars. Bench guys like Dickie Simpkins and Randy Brown ended up starting a bunch of games. And the only new signing that gave them any real help was Brent Barry, who'd come over from the Miami Heat. Reached for comment about that transaction, Miami coach Pat Riley only had jokes. And the rest of the Bulls roster? I've been a diehard NBA fan my whole life. Especially as a kid growing up in the 90s, I studied every team and wanted to know every single player, and I recognize like 3 of those guys. Shout out to Bill Wennington. So yeah, Chicago got smoked by the Jazz on opening night '99 and went on to lose 37 of their 50 games. In one of those losses, they scored just 49 points, the lowest game total for any team in the shot clock era. All that losing helped Chicago win the lottery, and Krause had himself a fantastic '99 draft. With the first pick, Duke star Elton Brand. With the mid-first rounder they'd acquired in return for Longley, a St. John's product by the name of Ron Artest, or at least by that name for the time being. And over the next year, Krause would put the finishing touches on his dismantling of the '98 champions. In September '99, the Bulls released Harper, who immediately became a starter for Phil Jackson and Tex Winter's next Triangle project in Los Angeles. During the season, Chicago traded away Kukoc. So just a year and a half removed from this, Jerry Krause had purged every single core member of the Bulls' 3P roster. All of them but Jordan were people Krause put there himself, yet a remarkable number of them left him on bad terms. But now Krause could start from scratch, doing what he cherished most, the skill that had fleshed out the teams around Jordan. Scouting, rebuilding the Bulls with young and undiscovered talent. That wasn't necessarily the plan to begin with. The Bulls coveted Tracy McGrady and Eddie Jones in 2000 free agency. T-Mac came to visit Chicago that summer and was greeted at the airport by the Bulls mascot and cheerleaders. But both he and Jones gravitated toward teams in their home state of Florida, so Chicago came up more or less empty. Thus, the Bulls were left to continue building with their selections in the famously terrible 2000 NBA draft. Krause was busy that night. He picked Floyd's former Iowa State recruit, Marcus Fizer, even though Fizer played the same position as Elton Brand. Then, Krause moved the pick he'd acquired for Kukoc to grab Michigan's Jamal Crawford. Crawford would go on to have a long, entertaining career, mostly not for the Bulls. Fizer, not so much. He played a few okay-ish seasons, then tore his ACL, then faded out of the league and spent most of his career overseas. Anyway, the young and regenerating Bulls continued to suck. They won 17 games in Brand's first year and just 15 the season following. That gave Chicago the best lottery odds in 2001, but they fell to the 4th pick. The Wizards, now run by none other than Michael Jordan, held the top spot, which, yeah. Krause went ahead and overrode his bad luck, boldly trading his rising star, Brand, to the Clippers for the 2nd draft pick, Tyson Chandler. And at 4, Chicago snagged local prospect Eddie Curry, both big men, both straight out of high school. A new, super young front court of the future assembled in one night. Chandler and Curry were picked on either side of 2002 Rookie of the Year Pau Gasol, but still, the new baby Bulls looked promising. And this truly was a baby team. Even Krause's free agent signings around this time tended to be youngsters, guys like Brad Miller, Ron Mercer, and Eddie Robinson. The Bulls stayed terrible, and their youthful makeup got kind of muddled. The rookies didn't really play enough, and in February of 2002, Krause sent Artest, Miller, and Mercer to the Pacers for a package headlined by the older Jalen Rose. Rose became the uninspiring go-to player for a team that finished with just 21 wins. Krause was getting criticized by this point, for detonating the post-Jordan Bulls and for failing to make progress since. He tuned it all out, since the Bulls had critics even when they were winning championships. Anyway, Chicago went back to the lottery, where they were dealt the second pick in the 2002 draft, just missing out on Yao Ming. They still got Duke point guard Jay Williams, who had a solid rookie year and helped the Bulls inch forward to 30 wins. The other youngsters also started to ramp up a bit under their new coach, who was a former Bull. Not that former Bull. Jordan's second retirement wasn't his last one, it turned out, and he'd moved from managing the Wizards to playing for them. No, the Bulls replaced Floyd with Bill Cartwright, the same person who Krause had once acquired as a player in exchange for Charles Oakley. That was back in 1988, one of Jordan's earliest points of irritation with his GM. And then Cartwright and MJ won 3 titles together. Oh, and a much older Oakley was back on the team when Cartwright took over as coach in the middle of the 2002 season. The Bulls are so weird. Anyway, the slight upward trend coming out of the 2003 season ran into sudden tragedy. Injuries sustained in a motorcycle crash ended Jay Williams' career after just 1 season. And by the time of Williams' accident, Krause was gone. He resigned in April of 2003 to tend to his health, ceding management duties to another former Bull, John Paxson. The team that Krause left behind was just starting to come together. But the core that eventually led Chicago back into playoff contention in the ensuing years was built entirely by Paxson. He swapped out Krause's guys, made some strong picks of his own, swung one horrible draft day trade in 2006, then hit the lottery jackpot in 2008 and zoomed upward from there. Looking back at the intervening period, some of the young talent Krause collected for the Chicago rebuild never got a chance to pan out. Fizer and Williams were both deeply unfortunate. But Krause's scouting eye did prove sharp. Artest would become a Defensive Player of the Year, All-Star, and champion on other teams. Elton Brand was a regular All-Star on another team. The guy he got traded for would also become a champion, All-Star, and a Defensive Player of the Year on other teams. Even Brad Miller went on to become an All-Star, you guessed it, on other teams. Listen, rebuilding a champion is tough, especially when you've just lost the game's best player and best coach. Chicago probably could have benefited more from their destruction if they were patient, or if they hadn't alienated so many people in the first place. Instead, the Bulls dissolved their aging and disgruntled championship team with haste, shipped out future stars well before they peaked, and slogged through deep doldrums before new management built their next contending team. Michael Jordan's final shot closed the curtains on one of pro sports' most impressive dynasties. The valley following that peak was nearly as impressive. The Bulls sunk as deep and as fast as any champion ever has. Theirs was a truly monumental collapse.